The Johnson family made a fatal calculation on a freezing Tuesday night in Seattle. As they threw Eleanor out of the mansion like garbage, laughing while she dragged a single trash bag down the driveway, they were certain they had secured their empire. They thought they were discarding a leech. In reality, they were arming their executioner. They never bothered to ask who Eleanor really was, and 6 months later, they paid the price. Inside a packed courtroom, the useless housewife didn't stand up to beg for alimony. She stood up to own them. Prepare for the most satisfying revenge in courtroom history. The mahogany doors of the Johnson estate didn't open often, but when they did, it was usually for galas, charity auctions, or to welcome senators. Tonight, they opened to dispose of a wife. Beatrice Johnson, the matriarch of the Johnson shipping dynasty, stood in the foyer, her arms crossed over a Chanel tweed blazer that cost more than most people's cars. She watched with cold, reptilian eyes as the young woman struggled with the heavy suitcase. "Faster, Eleanor," Beatrice snapped, checking her diamond-encrusted watch. "The cleaners are coming at 8. I want your scent out of the upholstery before then." Eleanor didn't look up. She kept her eyes on the marble floor, her hands trembling as she zipped her coat. She was 26, but tonight she looked 50. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed from 3 days of non-stop crying. "David," Eleanor whispered, her voice cracking. She looked past the imposing figure of her mother-in-law to the man standing by the fireplace. David Johnson, the man she had loved since college. The man she had nursed through a bout of pneumonia 2 years ago, sitting by his bedside for 5 nights straight. He was swirling a glass of scotch, refusing to meet her eyes. He looked impeccable in his tailored navy suit, the suit she had picked out for him. "David, please," she said, taking a step toward him. "You don't have to do it this way. I signed the papers. I waived the alimony. Why are you kicking me out at night? It's pouring rain." David finally looked up. His face, once the source of her comfort, was now a mask of irritation. He took a sip of his drink and sighed, as if he were the victim here. "Eleanor, stop making a scene," David said, his voice smooth and detached. "Jessica is moving in tomorrow morning. We need the closet space. And frankly, having you linger here is depressing. You don't fit the brand anymore." "The brand?" Eleanor repeated, stunned. "We were married for 4 years, David." "And those were 4 years of stagnation," Beatrice interjected, stepping between them. "Look at you. You're a mouse, a nobody. When David married you, we thought your orphan sob story would play well with the press. Humble beginnings and all that. But now, Johnson Shipping is merging with the Omnicorp Group. David needs a wife with bloodline, connections, and power. Not a charity case we picked up from a library." It was the cruelty that finally dried Eleanor's tears. The realization hit her like a physical blow. They truly believed she was nothing. They believed the lie she had lived for 4 years, that she was Eleanor Miller, a scholarship student with no family, no money, and no history. "I see," Eleanor said. Her voice was suddenly steadier. The tremble in her hands stopped. "So this is strictly business?" "It's always business, darling," Beatrice sneered. "Now get out. The Uber is waiting at the gate. We cancelled the driver. No point wasting company gas on a non-employee." Eleanor gripped the handle of her suitcase. She looked at David one last time. "You're making a mistake, David. Not because you're leaving me, but because you think you can treat people like disposable assets." David laughed, a short, sharp bark. "Eleanor, look around you. I live in a $20 million estate in the Highlands. You have a trash bag and a suitcase. I think I'm doing just fine. Goodbye." The heavy oak door slammed shut behind her, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Eleanor stood on the front porch. The rain in Seattle was relentless, icy sheets of water that soaked through her coat in seconds. She looked down at the muddy driveway. She had no car. David had leased it in the company name and taken the keys an hour ago. She began to walk. As she trudged down the winding driveway of the gated community, passing the security cameras that tracked her exit, she didn't look back at the mansion, glowing with warmth and light. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a burner phone, a cheap device she had bought 3 days ago when she saw the divorce papers on David's desk before he served them. She dialed a number she hadn't called in 5 years. The phone rang once, twice. Then a crisp, professional voice answered. "Horrington Global, private line. Who is this?" Eleanor stopped walking. She looked up at the stormy sky, the rain plastering her hair to her face. "It's me, Arthur," she said. "Tell the board I'm coming home, and tell legal to prepare the files on Johnson Shipping. I want to audit everything." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a sharp intake of breath. "Miss Eleanor? My God, we thought you were never coming back. Is it time?" "Yes, Arthur," Eleanor said, her eyes narrowing as she looked back at the iron gates of the Johnson estate. "It's time to defrost the accounts. I'm done playing the mouse." 3 months later. The boardroom of Johnson Shipping was in chaos. David Johnson slammed his fist onto the glass table, rattling the expensive water bottles. "What do you mean we're frozen? Explain it to me like I'm 5. His lawyer, a sweaty man named Greg Pelson, loosened his tie. "I'm trying, David. It's not just the merger with Omnicorp. It's the supply chain. We lost our contract with the Atlantic hub yesterday. Today, the Port of Singapore revoked our docking rights. And now, the bank is flagging our liquidity." Beatrice sat in the corner, her face pale. She was no longer the imperious queen she had been 3 months ago. The stress was showing in the new lines around her mouth. "Who is doing this?" she hissed. "Is it Omnicorp? Are they trying to drive our price down before the acquisition?" "It's not Omnicorp," Greg said, flipping through a thick stack of documents. "It's a third party, a holding company we've never dealt with directly. They own the ports, they own the logistics software we use, and apparently they just bought the debt on our flagship vessels." "Who are they?" David demanded. "Give me a name." Greg hesitated, looking at the file. "It's Harrington Global." The room went silent. "Harrington?" David scoffed. "The old European conglomerate. They deal in energy and tech. Why would they care about a mid-sized shipping firm in Seattle?" "I don't know," Greg said. "But they've filed a massive lawsuit against us, David. They're claiming intellectual property theft regarding the logistics software you launched last year. The Johnson Streamline system." David's face went white. "That software. That was..." He trailed off. He remembered where he got the idea for the software. It was Eleanor. Late nights at the kitchen table, Eleanor sketching out algorithms on napkins, explaining how to optimize shipping routes. He had taken her notes, gave them to his engineers, and claimed it was his genius. He never thought she would notice. He certainly never thought she could do anything about it. "That software is ours," Beatrice snapped, though she looked uncertain. "We patented it." "Harrington Global says the code base belongs to a legacy project of theirs from 6 years ago," Greg said grimly. "And they are dragging us to court, Superior Court. Next week. If we lose this, the merger is dead. Johnson Shipping goes bankrupt. We lose the house. We lose everything. Get me the best litigator in the city," David ordered, buttoning his jacket to hide his trembling hands. "Get me Robert Caldwell." "Caldwell is expensive," Greg warned. "I don't care. We are not losing to some faceless conglomerate. And where is Jessica?" "She's in Paris," Beatrice mumbled. "Shopping for the wedding dress?" "Good," David said. "Keep her there. I don't need my fiancé panicking. We go to court, we crush this Harrington claim, and we move on." The Seattle Superior Court was buzzing. It wasn't every day that a local titan like Johnson Shipping faced off against a global ghost like Harrington. Reporters lined the steps. David arrived in his Aston Martin, wearing his lucky charcoal suit. He flashed a confident smile for the cameras, but inside, his stomach was twisting. Beside him, Beatrice wore sunglasses, refusing to speak to the press. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was heavy. The air conditioning was humming, but David was sweating. On the defense side, David and Beatrice sat with their high-priced lawyer, Robert Caldwell. Caldwell looked relaxed, checking his phone. "Don't worry," Caldwell whispered to David. "Harrington sent a proxy. They usually do. We'll bury them in paperwork and settle for pennies." On the plaintiff's side, the table was empty. "Where are they?" David hissed. "The judge is about to enter." "Probably late, arrogant corporate types," Beatrice muttered. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge Harrison, a stern man with a reputation for zero tolerance, walked in and took his seat. He adjusted his glasses and looked at the empty plaintiff's table. "Is counsel for Harrington Global present?" the judge asked. The double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. The sound of heels clicking on the hardwood floor was rhythmic, precise, and authoritative. A woman walked in, flanked by two men in dark suits carrying briefcases. She was wearing a white power suit, sharp, tailored, and glowing against the drab wood of the courtroom. Her hair, once kept in a messy bun, was now a sleek, dark curtain falling to her shoulders. She wore oversized sunglasses. David squinted. There was something familiar about the walk. The woman reached the plaintiff's table. She set down a single, thin leather folder. She didn't look at the gallery. She didn't look at the judge yet. She turned slowly toward the defense table. She reached up and removed her sunglasses. David stopped breathing. Beatrice audibly gasped, her hand flying to her throat. It was Eleanor. But it wasn't the Eleanor they knew. The slump in her shoulders was gone. The fear in her eyes was replaced by a cold, diamond-hard gaze. She looked expensive. She looked dangerous. "Your Honor," Eleanor said, her voice projecting clear and strong, without a hint of the stutter she used to have around David. "Eleanor Harrington, representing the plaintiff, Harrington Global. Apologies for the delay." The elevator was slow. "Harrington," David whispered, his voice so high it was almost a squeak. "Eleanor Harrington." Robert Caldwell, the shark lawyer, dropped his pen. He looked from Eleanor to David. "You didn't tell me she was a Harrington." I didn't know," David stammered. "She said her last name was Miller. She was a waitress." Eleanor ignored them. She turned her gaze to David, locking eyes with him. For a second, the corner of her mouth lifted in a smirk that was terrifying in its subtlety. "Mr. Johnson looks unwell," Eleanor said to the room, though her eyes never left David's. "Perhaps he needs a glass of water. It's going to be a very long day." The silence in the courtroom stretched so tight it felt like a wire about to snap. Judge Harrison peered over his spectacles, looking from the white-suited woman to the sweating defendant. "Ms. Harrington?" the judge asked, glancing at the docket. "The paperwork lists a S. Harrington as lead counsel. I assumed it was Samuel Harrington, the senior partner." "Samuel is my father, Your Honor," Eleanor said smoothly, placing her hands on the table. "He retired last year. I took over as acting CEO and general counsel for the North American division. My bar number is listed in the file." Robert Caldwell shot out of his seat. Objection, Your Honor. This is prejudicial. The opposing counsel is the defendant's ex-wife. This is a clear conflict of interest. She's using this court to settle a domestic grudge. Eleanor didn't even turn her head. Your Honor, Harrington Global is suing Johnson Shipping for the theft of proprietary algorithms worth $400 million. The fact that I was briefly married to the CEO of the defendant company is relevant only in how he gained access to steal our property. I am not here as a scorned wife. I am here as the owner of the stolen asset. Judge Harrison looked at Caldwell. If she is the IP holder, Mr. Caldwell, she is the most qualified person to identify the theft. Overruled. Proceed, Ms. Harrington. Caldwell sank back into his chair, whispering furiously to Beatrice. Why didn't you tell me she was a lawyer? She wasn't, Beatrice hissed back, her face grey. She was a barista. We found her in a coffee shop. Eleanor walked to the center of the room. She moved with a predator's grace, the soft click-clack of her heels the only sound in the room. She stopped in front of the witness box where David had been sworn in. Mr. Johnson, Eleanor began. Her voice was cool, stripped of any warmth he remembered. You are the CEO of Johnson Shipping, correct? David adjusted his tie. He tried to summon the charm that usually worked on investors. He looked at her with a sad, puppy dog expression. Yes. Eleanor, look, I know you're upset. Address me as Ms. Harrington or counsel, Eleanor interrupted. The command cracked like a whip. We are not in your living room, Mr. Johnson. David flinched. The jury shifted in their seats. Fine, Ms. Harrington. David spat the name. Let's talk about the Johnson Streamline software, Eleanor said, pacing slowly. This software revolutionized your business 3 months ago. It cut your fuel costs by 30%. It optimized your docking schedules. It saved your company from bankruptcy. Is that correct? My team developed a great product, yes, David said, regaining some confidence. We worked hard on it. Your team, Eleanor repeated. Can you name the lead engineer on the project? David hesitated. Well, it was a collaborative effort. We had many consultants. Name one, Eleanor pressed. I oversaw the project myself mostly, David lied. It was a safe lie, he thought. He was the boss. Who could prove otherwise? Eleanor stopped pacing. She picked up a remote control from the table. You oversaw it yourself. Impressive. You have a degree in business administration, Mr. Johnson. I wasn't aware you were also fluent in Python, C++, and proprietary marine logistics coding. I'm a quick learner, David sneered. Is that so? Eleanor smiled. It was a terrifying smile. Then you won't mind if we look at the source code. David froze. He knew nothing about the code. He had just taken the flash drive Eleanor had left on his laptop one night, handed it to his IT guys, and told them to compile it. Defense claims the code is a trade secret, Caldwell shouted, jumping up again. It is, Eleanor agreed, which is why I am only showing the metadata timestamps. Permission to approach Exhibit A, Your Honor? Granted. Eleanor pressed a button. A large screen descended on the courtroom wall. A projector hummed to life, displaying lines of complex computer code. This, Eleanor said, pointing to the screen, is the kernel of the Johnson Streamline system. Mr. Johnson, can you explain to the court what this function on line 402 does? David stared at the screen. It looked like gibberish. It optimizes the engine output. Incorrect, Eleanor said. Line 402 is a loop for tracking cargo weight distribution, but that's a common mistake for a non-coder. Let's look at something simpler. She clicked the remote. The screen zoomed in on the header of the file. Mr. Johnson, when did you write this code? Last January, David guessed. Around the start of the year. January, Eleanor nodded. Interesting, because the metadata on this file shows it was created on November 14th, 2 years ago, at 3 a.m. Eleanor turned to the jury. 2 years ago, November 14th. Mr. Johnson, do you recall where you were on that date? David racked his brain. I have a busy schedule. I can't remember every night. I can, Eleanor said softly. Her voice dropped an octave, becoming intimate, dangerous. You were in the hospital, David. You had severe pneumonia. You were on a ventilator. You couldn't lift a spoon, let alone write 10,000 lines of code. The courtroom murmured. Beatrice looked like she was about to faint. I might have dictated it, David stammered. Dictated C++ code while in a coma? Eleanor raised an eyebrow. You truly are a genius, Mr. Johnson. But there is a problem. If you were in the hospital, who was sitting next to your bed, on her laptop, working through the night to make sure your company didn't collapse while you were sick? David's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He remembered. He remembered waking up in the fog of medication and seeing the glow of Eleanor's laptop screen. He had thought she was watching movies. I don't know what you're talking about, David whispered. You don't? Eleanor turned back to the screen. Then let me introduce you to the ghost key. The ghost key? Judge Harrison leaned forward. Explain, counsel. Eleanor turned to the judge. Your Honor, every master programmer has a signature, a way of marking their work that cannot be deleted without destroying the entire program. It's called a ghost key. It's usually hidden in the compiled architecture, invisible to the user, invisible even to other engineers unless they know exactly where to look. She turned back to David. When you stole the flash drive from my desk the day you served me divorce papers, you handed it to your IT department. You told them to scrub my name from the comments. You told them to rebrand the interface. And they did. They did a good job erasing the surface. But they didn't check the binary foundation. Eleanor typed a command into a laptop connected to the projector. Run. Decrypt sequence. Alpha. On the big screen, the wall of code dissolved. It rearranged itself, the letters and numbers swirling until they formed a distinct image. It wasn't code anymore. It was text. The text was embedded in the very structure of the software. You couldn't remove it without the software ceasing to function. The text read, Property of Harrington Global, authored by S. Harrington, for David. Happy anniversary, my love. The gasp in the courtroom was audible. A reporter in the back row actually stood up to get a better photo. Eleanor looked at David. Her expression wasn't triumphant. It was almost pitying. I wrote this software as an anniversary gift, David, she said quietly. I was going to give it to you. I wanted to help you. I wanted you to succeed. I was waiting for the right moment to tell you that the orphan girl you married was actually the heir to the Harrington empire. I wanted to be sure you loved me for me, not for my father's billions. She took a step closer to the witness box. But you didn't give me the chance. You told me I was stagnant. You told your mother I was a charity case. You threw me out in the rain because you wanted a wife with power and connections. She gestured to the glowing words on the screen, a permanent testament to her love and his betrayal. Well, David, Eleanor said, her voice hard as steel. You wanted a connection to Harrington Global? You have it. You just happen to be on the wrong side of the table. David looked at the screen. Happy anniversary, my love. The words mocked him. He looked at Beatrice. His mother had her face in her hands. She knew. The game was over. This is a trick, David yelled, standing up. She planted that. She hacked us. "Mr. Johnson, sit down," the judge bellowed. "No," David shouted, losing control. "She's a liar. She told me she was poor. She deceived me. That's fraud. This marriage was a fraud." "The only fraud here, Mr. Johnson," Eleanor cut in, "is your company's valuation. Because as of this moment, I am filing a motion for an immediate injunction. The software driving your ships belongs to me, and I am revoking your license to use it." "You can't do that," David screamed. "Our ships are in the middle of the ocean. If you shut down the system, the navigation fails. The cooling systems fail. The cargo spoils." "Then I suggest you call your captains," Eleanor said, checking her watch, "because my engineers initiated the remote kill switch 5 minutes ago." At that exact moment, the phone on the defense table buzzed, then another phone, then Beatrice's phone. Beatrice fumbled to answer hers. She listened for a second, her eyes widening in horror. She dropped the phone to the floor. "The fleet," Beatrice whispered, her voice carrying through the silent courtroom. "The engines just died. The Atlantic leader. It's drifting." David looked at Eleanor with pure terror. "You stopped the ships?" "I repossessed my property," Eleanor said coldly. "You threw me out with a trash bag, David. I'm just taking back what I packed." Eleanor turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the plaintiff rests, and in light of the defendant's admission that the software is critical to his operations, we move for immediate summary judgment and full damages. We are asking for 100% of Johnson Shipping's equity as compensation for the theft and the subsequent profits made using stolen IP." Judge Harrison looked at the evidence. He looked at the chaos on the defense bench. He banged his gavel. "Court is in recess for 1 hour while I review the motion. But Mr. Johnson, I suggest you start looking for a very good bankruptcy lawyer." David slumped back into his chair. He looked at Eleanor, who was calmly packing her laptop into her designer briefcase. She didn't look back at him. But the story wasn't over. As the courtroom cleared, Eleanor felt a hand on her arm. She turned to see a tall man in the gallery, someone she hadn't noticed before. He was applauding slowly. It was Lucas Omni, the CEO of Omnicorp, the man David was trying to merge with. "Hell of a show, Miss Harrington," Lucas said, a shark-like grin on his face. "You just destroyed the company I was about to buy. You cost me a deal." "I saved you from buying a hollow shell, Mr. Omni," Eleanor replied, unfazed. "You should be thanking me." "Oh, I am," Lucas said, stepping closer. "But now you own a fleet of dead ships, and I'm the only one with the logistics network to get them moving again. Seems like you and I have business to discuss." Eleanor narrowed her eyes. This was the twist she hadn't planned for. Lucas Omni wasn't just an observer. He was a player, and he looked like he wanted to play hardball. "Meet me at my office in an hour," Eleanor said. "Don't be late." As she walked out of the courtroom, the paparazzi flashes blinded her. She was the woman of the hour, the queen of vengeance. But as she stepped into the cool Seattle air, she knew the war wasn't won yet. David was broken. But now she had to deal with the sharks who smelled blood in the water. And Lucas Omni looked very hungry. The skyline of Seattle was painted in hues of violet and charcoal as Eleanor stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of her penthouse suite at the Four Seasons. It served as her temporary headquarters while the Harrington Global legal team gutted the carcass of Johnson Shipping. She held a glass of sparkling water, watching the city lights flicker on. 3 hours ago, she had been a discarded wife. Now, she was the owner of the most advanced shipping logistics system on the planet, and her ex-husband was likely hyperventilating in a lawyer's office. "Mr. Omni is here," Arthur, her assistant, announced from the doorway. "Send him in," Eleanor said, turning around. She didn't sit. She wanted to meet him standing. Lucas Omni walked in. He was different from David. David was handsome in a boyish, polished way, like a catalogue model. Lucas was rugged, with sharp features and eyes that looked like they could calculate the value of your soul in seconds. He wasn't wearing a tie. "Nice view," Lucas said, walking past her to look at the Space Needle. "Better than the view from the Johnson estate, I'd wager." "I didn't invite you here to discuss real estate, Mr. Omni," Eleanor said, placing her glass on the marble console. "You said you have a proposal." Lucas turned, leaning against the window frame. "I do. You froze the Johnson fleet. That's about 40 vessels sitting dead in the water across the Pacific. That's billions of dollars in cargo rotting. It's a power move, Eleanor. I respect it. But it's also a waste." "It's leverage," Eleanor corrected. "It's a ticking time bomb," Lucas countered. "The unions are going to sue. The clients are going to sue. By the time you actually pry the company out of David's hands, the reputation of Johnson Shipping will be toxic. You'll inherit a graveyard." Eleanor knew he was right. That was the problem with revenge. Sometimes you burned down the house while you were still inside it. "So what do you suggest?" she asked, crossing her arms. "A merger," Lucas said. "Not between Omnicorp and Johnson, between Omnicorp and Harrington." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "You want to partner with me?" "I want the software," Lucas said bluntly. "The Johnson Streamline code. It's brilliant. It's the missing piece my company needs to dominate the Asian market. You have the tech. I have the infrastructure to deploy it immediately, bypassing the Johnson ships entirely. We leave David's ships to rot. We take his clients, his routes, and his contracts. We crush him, not by taking his company, but by making his company irrelevant." Eleanor studied him. It was a ruthless plan. It was perfect. "And what do I get?" Eleanor asked, "besides the satisfaction of burying David?" 50-50 split on all new routes, Lucas said, and a seat on the Omnicorp board. It was a generous offer. Suspiciously generous. "Why?" Eleanor asked. "You could just wait for me to stumble. Why partner?" Lucas took a step closer. The air in the room seemed to charge with electricity. "Because I did my homework, Eleanor. I didn't just find out you were a Harrington today in court. I knew 6 months ago." Eleanor froze. "You knew?" "I was doing due diligence on the Johnson merger," Lucas admitted. "I dug into David's life. I found the marriage certificate. I traced your social security number. I saw the connection to Samuel Harrington. I was waiting for you to make your move. I knew a woman like you wouldn't stay quiet forever. I just wanted to see how hard you'd hit." He smiled, and for the first time it looked genuine. "And you hit harder than I expected. I like that in a partner." Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. Lucas Omni was dangerous. He had watched her suffer for 6 months, watched David humiliate her, just to see if she was strong enough to survive. He wasn't a savior. He was a scientist watching a lab experiment. But right now, he was a useful weapon. "Fine," Eleanor said, extending her hand. "We crush Johnson. We take the clients. But I want one more thing." "Name it," Lucas said, taking her hand. His grip was warm and firm. "I want the Johnson estate," Eleanor said, coldly. "The bank is going to foreclose on it when David's stock tanks tomorrow. I want to buy the debt. I want to be the one to evict them." Lucas grinned. "Ruthless. Consider it done." 2 weeks later. The rain was falling again, just as it had been the night Eleanor was thrown out. But this time, the dynamic was reversed. Eleanor sat in the back of a black limousine as it rolled through the iron gates of the Johnson estate. Beside her sat Arthur, holding a briefcase full of eviction notices. The mansion looked the same. But the atmosphere was different. The lawns were slightly overgrown. The gardeners had been let go last week. The lights were dim. Eleanor stepped out of the car. She was wearing a trench coat that cost more than David's car. 2 private security guards flanked her. She walked up the steps and didn't bother knocking. The guards pushed the doors open. The foyer was filled with boxes. Beatrice was frantically packing crystal vases into bubble wrap. David was sitting on the stairs, his head in his hands, a bottle of scotch beside him. When they saw Eleanor, Beatrice dropped a vase. It shattered, the sound echoing through the empty house. "What are you doing here?" Beatrice shrieked. You witch! You ruined us!" Eleanor walked past the shattered glass, her heels crunching on the shards. She stopped in front of David. "Get up, David," she said. David looked up. His eyes were bloodshot. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. "Eleanor, please, I can fix this. I can appeal. We can make a deal." "There is no deal," Eleanor said. "Omnicorp acquired your debt this morning, and since I am now a majority shareholder in the new joint venture, I own your debt. You are in default, David." "You own the house," David whispered, horror dawning on him. "I own the house. I own the cars. I own the furniture," Eleanor listed them off. "And you have 1 hour to vacate the premises." "1 hour?" Beatrice screamed. "We've lived here for 30 years. You can't do this." "You gave me 5 minutes," Eleanor reminded her. "I'm being generous." Suddenly the sound of heels clicking came from the upper landing. Eleanor looked up to see Jessica, David's fiancée. She was dressed in a travel outfit, pulling 2 Louis Vuitton suitcases. "Jessica," David said, standing up. "Where are you going? We have to fight this." Jessica paused at the top of the stairs. She looked at David with pure disgust. "Fight what, David?" Jessica snapped. "You're bankrupt. Your accounts are frozen. You're a laughingstock. I'm not marrying a pauper." "But we love each other," David stammered. Jessica laughed. It was a cruel, hollow sound. "I loved the lifestyle, David. I loved the brand. You don't have a brand anymore. You're just a loser who let his ex-wife outsmart him." She walked down the stairs, breezing past David. She stopped in front of Eleanor. "You win," Jessica said to Eleanor, shrugging. "He was terrible in bed anyway." With that, Jessica walked out the front door into the waiting Uber, leaving David shattered in the hallway. Eleanor felt a twinge of pity, but she crushed it. This was the man who had erased her existence. "Arthur," Eleanor said, turning to her assistant, "check the rooms. Make sure they don't take anything that belongs to the estate. I want them out by 9 p.m. "Eleanor, wait," David pleaded, grabbing her hand. Eleanor's security guard stepped forward, but Eleanor held up a hand. She let David hold her hand for a second. His palm was sweaty. "I still love you," David lied. "We can start over. With your money and my connections." "You have no connections, David," Eleanor said, pulling her hand away as if she had touched something slimy. "And I never loved this version of you. I loved the man I thought you were. That man never existed." She turned to leave, but her phone buzzed. It was a text from Lucas Omni. "Check the news. We have a problem." Eleanor frowned. She opened the news app on her phone. The headline made her blood run cold. "Breaking. Omnicorp under investigation for insider trading. Assets frozen." "What?" Eleanor whispered. She tapped the article. The source of the leak was anonymous, but the details were specific. Someone had leaked the details of the merger before it was signed. The SEC was halting everything. The Harrington Omni deal was dead in the water. And then a second text from Lucas came through. "I didn't leak it, Eleanor, but I know who did. You have a mole. And they just played both of us. Eleanor looked up at David. He was still crying on the stairs. He didn't have the brain power to pull this off. Beatrice was too hysterical. Jessica was too shallow. Who else knew? Arthur, Eleanor said, her voice trembling slightly. Who had access to the merger files? Arthur looked pale. Only 3 people, Miss Eleanor. You, me, and your father. Eleanor felt the room spin. Her father, Samuel Harrington. He had retired. He was supposed to be in the Alps. Why would he sabotage his own daughter's victory? Unless... Eleanor realized she had made the same mistake David had. She had focused so much on the enemy in front of her, she forgot to look at the people standing behind her. We have to go, Eleanor said, turning on her heel. Leave them. Let them keep the house for tonight. I have to get to the airport. Eleanor, David called out, confused by her sudden panic. Don't get comfortable, David, she shouted back over her shoulder. I'll be back for the keys, but first I have to go kill a king. As the limousine sped away from the Johnson estate, Eleanor dialed her father's private number. It rang once. Hello, Eleanor. The deep, gravelly voice of Samuel Harrington answered. He didn't sound surprised. Why? Eleanor asked, her voice shaking with rage. I had them. I had the deal with Omni. You were making a deal with a shark, darling, Samuel said calmly. Lucas Omni would have eaten you alive in 6 months. I taught you better than that. You don't share power. You take it. So you torched the deal? I torched the path, Samuel corrected. Omni is out of the picture now. The SEC will tie him up for years. David is ruined. Johnson Shipping is unguarded. You don't need a merger, Eleanor. You need a hostile takeover. I bought the controlling stake in Johnson 10 minutes ago while the stock was crashing. Congratulations. You're not just the owner of the software anymore. You are the CEO of Johnson Shipping. Eleanor lowered the phone. She stared out at the rain. She had won. She had beaten David. She had escaped Lucas. But in doing so, she had become exactly what she hated, a pawn in her father's game. She wasn't just Eleanor Miller anymore. She wasn't just Eleanor Johnson. She was Eleanor Harrington. And now she was the head of the very empire that had destroyed her marriage. She looked at her reflection in the car window. The eyes staring back were harder, colder. Driver, Eleanor said. Change of plans. Take me to the office. I have a company to restructure. The air in the boardroom was so cold it felt sterile, recycled through vents that had been scrubbing the atmosphere of panic for the last 2 days. This was the room where David Johnson used to hold court, laughing at his competitors while sipping scotch. Now, the scotch was gone. The Johnson sign in the lobby was being dismantled, and Eleanor Harrington sat at the head of the obsidian table. She didn't look like the woman who had been thrown out of a mansion 6 months ago. She didn't even look like the lawyer who had walked into the courtroom last week. She looked like a monarch who had just conquered a neighboring kingdom and was deciding which buildings to burn. Around the table sat 12 men in expensive suits, the new board of directors appointed by the hostile takeover. They were wolves, every single one of them, hand-picked by her father for their ruthlessness. But the biggest wolf wasn't in the room. He was looming over them on a massive 85-inch screen at the far end of the wall, broadcasting live from his chalet in the Swiss Alps. Samuel Harrington, her father, the man who had taught her how to survive, only to try and eat her alive at the finish line. You look comfortable, Eleanor. Samuel's voice boomed through the surround sound speakers. The connection was crystal clear, capturing the arrogant twinkle in his eyes. I admit, I was worried you might crumble when the Omni deal fell through. But you held your composure. That's good. A CEO needs composure. Eleanor didn't smile. She rested her hands on the table, her fingers interlaced. You didn't call this meeting to compliment my posture, Father. You called it to give orders. Samuel chuckled, taking a sip of wine. Not orders, darling. Directives. As you know, the acquisition is complete. I bought the controlling stake of Johnson Shipping during the crash. I own the boats. I own the docks. I own the debt. We are now the undisputed kings of Pacific logistics. He leaned into the camera, his face hardening. Now, end this temper tantrum. Unlock the fleet. The Johnson Streamline software is still encrypted. We have 40 massive cargo vessels sitting dead in the water from Tokyo to Long Beach. Every hour they sit there, we lose $3 million. Reinstate the navigation protocols, Eleanor. Let's get back to business. The board members turned to look at Eleanor, expecting her to type the command, to bow her head, to accept her role as the figurehead her father intended her to be. Eleanor didn't move. She didn't blink. "No," she said. The word hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Samuel's smile vanished instantly. "Excuse me?" "I said no," Eleanor repeated, her voice calm, devoid of the stutter she used to have when David would yell at her. "I will not be unlocking the software. The fleet stays frozen. Eleanor, don't play games with me," Samuel warned, his voice dropping an octave, a low rumble of thunder. "I own 51% of this company. I am the majority shareholder. I am the chairman of the board. If I tell you to unlock the assets, you unlock the assets. Or do I need to fly to Seattle and do it myself?" Eleanor stood up. She walked slowly toward the screen, her heels clicking rhythmically on the hardwood floor. She looked small against the giant image of her father, but her presence filled the room. "You can fly here, Father. You can bring your entire IT team. You can bring the NSA for all I care. But none of you can unlock those ships." She stopped directly in front of the screen, staring into the digital eyes of the man who had raised her. "You made a mistake in your rush to undercut me," she said softly. "You bought the company. You bought the physical assets, the steel hulls, the fuel, the warehouses, the office chairs. But you didn't read the fine print of the court judgment." She pulled a folded document from her blazer pocket and tossed it onto the table. It slid across the polished surface, stopping in front of the board members. The court ruled that the Johnson Streamline Code is the intellectual property of Eleanor Harrington, the individual. Not Harrington Global, not Johnson Shipping. "Me." Eleanor pointed a finger at her own chest. "The software is licensed to my biometric signature. It requires a retinal scan from me and only me to activate. Without that scan, those 40 ships are nothing but floating scrap metal. You bought a fleet of ghosts, Father." The boardroom erupted in murmurs. Samuel's face turned a violent shade of red. He slammed his fist onto his desk in Switzerland, shaking the camera. "You ungrateful little brat," he roared. "You would bankrupt your own inheritance. You would burn $1 billion investment just to spite me." "I'm not doing it out of spite," Eleanor said, her voice cutting through his shouting. "I'm doing it for leverage. You taught me that, remember? You don't share power, you take it. That's what you told me when you sabotaged my deal with Lucas Omni." She checked her watch. "Here is the situation. The ships are degrading. The clients are suing. The stock is plummeting again because the market realizes the fleet is paralyzed. You are bleeding money, Father. Hundreds of millions. And I am the only tourniquet in the world." "What do you want?" Samuel hissed, his eyes narrowing. "I want your shares," Eleanor said. "The voting shares for the North American division, all of them. I want a legally binding contract that grants me full autonomy. You retire, Father. For real this time. You stay in the Alps, you eat your fondue, you ski, and you let me run the empire without looking over my shoulder. "You're blackmailing your own father," Samuel whispered, sounding almost impressed despite his fury. "I'm negotiating," Eleanor corrected. "You have 5 minutes to email the transfer of power documents to my tablet. If you don't, I will initiate the permanent delete sequence on the source code. The software will vanish, and you will be left with the most expensive pile of junk in maritime history." The silence that followed was agonizing. The board members held their breath. They looked from the furious old lion on the screen to the young lioness standing in the room. Samuel stared at her. He looked for fear. He looked for hesitation. He found neither. He saw the steel he had always wished for in a son, finally realized in the daughter he had underestimated. He let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a dry, bitter sound. "Fine," Samuel grunted. He began typing on his keyboard. "You win. The lawyers are sending the draft now. But Eleanor?" "Yes." "Don't come crying to me when the crown gets too heavy," Samuel warned. "It's lonely at the top." "I've been lonely for 4 years, Father," Eleanor replied, watching the email notification ping on her tablet. "I'll manage." She tapped the screen, accepted the transfer, and then turned to the terrified board members. She smiled, a genuine, terrifying smile. "Gentlemen," she said, "the fleet is unlocked. Get to work. We have an empire to rebuild." 3 weeks later, the Seattle rain had finally stopped, leaving the city washed clean and glistening under a pale grey sky. Eleanor sat in the corner booth of The Grind, a small, nondescript coffee shop near the wharf. The vinyl seats were cracked, the air smelled of burnt beans and damp coats, and the fluorescent lights hummed with an annoying buzz. It was a far cry from the boardrooms and penthouses she now inhabited. But this place mattered. This was where she had worked 5 years ago. This was where she had met David. The bell above the door chimed. Eleanor looked up from her black coffee. A man walked in. He paused at the entrance, wiping his feet on the mat. He was wearing a grey suit that was clearly bought off the rack. The sleeves were too long, the fabric cheap and shiny. His hair, once styled with expensive salon products, was grown out and messy. He looked tired. He looked older. It was David Johnson. He walked to the counter, counting out coins from his pocket to pay for a small coffee. His hands shook slightly. When he turned around, he froze. He saw her. For a long moment, he looked like he might bolt. Shame, raw and visceral, washed over his face. But then, his shoulders slumped. He had nowhere left to run. He walked slowly over to her booth. "Are you here to twist the knife?" David asked, his voice hoarse. He didn't sit down. He stood there, clutching his paper cup like a lifeline. "Sit down, David," Eleanor said quietly. He hesitated, then slid into the seat opposite her. He couldn't meet her eyes. He looked out the window at the passing cars. "I heard Beatrice moved to Ohio," Eleanor said. "Yeah," David mumbled. "My aunt took her in. She's not doing well. She cries a lot, blames me for everything." "And Jessica?" David let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Jessica left me at the airport. She blocked my number before her plane even took off. I saw on Instagram she's already dating a hedge fund manager in New York." He finally looked at Eleanor. His eyes were red-rimmed. "I lost everything, Eleanor. The house, the cars, the friends. I'm staying in a motel on 4th Street, the one with the neon sign that buzzes all night. I have an interview in an hour at a used car lot, commission only." "You were a terrible husband, David," Eleanor said. Her voice wasn't angry. It was factual. "You were weak. You let your mother run your life. You treated people like accessories. You threw me out like garbage because you thought I damaged your brand." "I know," David whispered. Tears pooled in his eyes. "I know. I was so arrogant. I thought I was the prize. I thought the money made me special. I didn't realize you were the only real thing in my life." He reached across the table, his hand hovering near hers, but not daring to touch it. "I'm sorry, Eleanor. I know that doesn't fix anything. But I am sorry." Eleanor looked at him. She searched inside herself for the anger that had fueled her for 6 months. She looked for the hate, but it was gone, burnt to ash. All that was left was a strange, distant pity. "I accept your apology," Eleanor said. David looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "Does that mean—" "It means I don't hate you anymore, David," Eleanor said. "I don't think about you at all." The hope in his eyes died, replaced by the crushing realization that indifference is far worse than hatred. Eleanor reached into her designer purse. She pulled out a small white business card. It wasn't gold embossed. It wasn't for an executive position. It was a standard HR card. She slid it across the table. "Johnson Shipping, my company, is hiring," Eleanor said. David looked at the card. You want to hire me?" "We need a night shift logistics coordinator," Eleanor said. "It pays $22 an hour. It involves sitting in a drafty warehouse, tracking shipping containers, and dealing with angry truckers at 3 a.m. It is grueling, thankless, invisible work." She leaned forward. "It is the exact job you used to mock when we were married. You used to call those workers ants." David stared at the card. His face flushed. "You want to humiliate me? You want me to work for you as a grunt?" "I want to see if you can be a man," Eleanor said, standing up and buttoning her trench coat. "I'm giving you an opportunity, David. Something you never gave me. If you take the job, you will be treated exactly like everyone else. No special treatment. No name recognition. You start at the very bottom." She looked down at him. "If you can survive that, if you can learn what it actually means to work, then maybe one day you'll become a person worth knowing." She didn't wait for his answer. She turned and walked toward the door. "Eleanor!" David called out. She paused, her hand on the brass handle. "Thank you," he whispered. Eleanor didn't look back. She pushed the door open and stepped out into the cool Seattle air. A sleek, black Maybach was idling at the curb. The rear door opened, and Eleanor slid into the leather interior. Sitting on the other side was Lucas Omni. He was looking at a tablet, reviewing the merged stock prices. He looked up as she buckled her seatbelt. "You hired him, didn't you?" Lucas asked, a smirk playing on his lips. "I gave him a choice," Eleanor corrected. "Whether he takes it is up to him." "You're softer than you look, Harrington," Lucas teased, handing her a glass of sparkling water from the car's console. "It's not softness, Omni," Eleanor replied, taking the glass. She looked out the tinted window as the car pulled away, leaving the small coffee shop and her past life behind. "It's closure. He needed a lifeline, and I needed to know that I was strong enough to throw him one without getting pulled back in." Lucas nodded, impressed. "Well, the lifeline seems to be working for us too. The market reacted well to the reconciliation news. Our combined logistics network is projected to dominate 60% of the global trade by next quarter, but the SEC is still watching us like hawks." "Let them watch," Eleanor said, her eyes gleaming with a dangerous ambition. "They've never seen a team like us before." She tapped the driver's partition. "Take us to the port," she ordered. "I want to see my ships moving." As the car sped toward the harbor, Eleanor watched the skyline of the city she now owned. She had been a waitress. She had been a trophy wife. She had been a victim. But as she watched the cranes of the port rising like steel giants in the distance, she knew exactly who she was now. She was Eleanor Harrington, and she was just getting started. And that is how Eleanor Harrington went from a discarded wife with a trash bag to the queen of the shipping empire. She didn't just win the court case. She outsmarted her ex, her rival, and even her own father to take the throne. It's the ultimate lesson. Never underestimate someone just because they're quiet. You never know when they're holding the keys to your entire life. If you enjoyed this saga of revenge, betrayal, and absolute justice, smash that like button right now. It really helps the channel. And tell me in the comments, do you think Eleanor should have given David that job, or should she have let him starve? I want to hear your take. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you never miss the next story. See you in the next video.